Hello everyone and welcome to episode 5 of Galactic Grooves. My name is Chip Boaz and I'm a jazz bassist, but I'm also a lifelong Star Wars fan. Usually around here you'll hear me playing lots of music, but this is the time when I talk Star Wars because every day can't be all about that bass. So hang on, we're going to talk Andor, the High Republic, and more. Are you ready to get your groove on? It was a good week in Star Wars. We got a new episode of Andor that I'm going to be breaking down in a little bit here. I hope you got a chance to see and hear Shoulda Stuck with the Spotchka, the full version. I gave you a little sneak peek last week, and then I released the full video a few days ago. Let me know what you think. I had some fun with that again. You know, we need more music in the Star Wars universe. We need songwriters telling the story. So I had to tell that story about Tim. I'm still looking for that gig in the calf shops. I'm on the phone with Coruscant. We'll see what happens with that. But hold on. Let me know what you thought of that one. There is another one coming. I'm working on writing another song right now. I bet next week you're going to hear that. It's got some Cantina vibes to it, so get ready. I also wanted to spend a few minutes talking about something that I think is super cool, but I don't think it's as big in the Star Wars universe as some of these other things we're talking about, the Disney Plus shows, the movies and whatnot. And that is the High Republic. Now, phase 2 of the High Republic just started this week. The first book in that series was released, and they're going to keep on coming from this point. Now, some of you may or may not be aware of what the High Republic is because, again, it's not as high profile as The Mandalorian or Obi-Wan Kenobi or Andor or something like that. This is a little bit of a different thing. So I wanted to talk about it for a minute, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the High Republic because I don't think it gets talked about enough. So the High Republic was originally released, or some information was released about it way back in 2019. And at that point, it was referred to as Project Luminous. And that was all we knew. There was this really cool big thing coming called Project Luminous, and there was a lot of hype around it. Soon it was announced that Project Luminous was actually a series of books and comics and audio novels that would be based around this unexplored area of Star Wars called the High Republic. Now, the High Republic era sits a couple of centuries before the Phantom Menace. So this is prequel to the prequels, right? This is way back there. Now, for some of us, this is bringing in some of the vibes of the EU Extended Universe series of books and comics that came out between, in that gap between the prequels and the sequel trilogy. There was a lot of books that explored the time after Return of the Jedi. And there were books that went back. We got books and actually video games that explored things like the Old Republic. A lot of you may have played that game, Knights of the Old Republic, that explored the early days of the Jedi and the Sith and whatnot. There was Shadows of the Empire, which took place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. There was so much out there and so many different stories. Now, of course, Disney threw all that away when they bought Star Wars. They didn't throw it away. They keep it around and they refer to it as not canon. It's a Legends material, but it's not relevant to the main timeline. So they've been going back and filling it in. And now we're jumping way back before the Phantom Menace and exploring this era of the High Republic. Now, fortunately, they hired some really great, experienced Star Wars writers to make this happen. We've got people like Claudia Gray, Justina Ireland, Daniel Jose Oder, Kevin Scott, and Charles Soule were the first authors to really get this going, and they got it going through a series of novels and comics. And it was pretty exciting. It's supposed to be this golden era of the Jedi, and it really gives us a different angle on their place in the universe, their connection to the Force, and everything as we know. It's really, really interesting. I've read all the books and the comics in Phase 1 at this point. I have to say, I am really invested in this. You can tell that the authors not only were excited about creating something new, but they were excited about telling a through story. They all got together at Lucasfilm for a long time and planned out the greater arcs of the stories. I've read interviews with them where they talked about, being on the phone with each other while they were writing to make sure there were connections. And so it's a really fluid story that makes sense, even though, you may be jumping between a novel and then it branches off into a comic and comes back together. It really, really makes sense. And to me, that was some really, really exciting storytelling. Now, I do have to admit, when I read the first novel, Light of the Jedi, it was a little difficult to get into at first because you're just exploring so many new characters. And, you meet a lot of Jedi in that first storyline. Now, Yoda is still around. I mean, you remember in Return of the Jedi, Yoda, was 900 years old, so he's been around for a while. So we get to meet a younger version of Yoda, but he doesn't really play a big role, honestly. Most of the spotlight is shined on these new Jedi who are kind of the ones making things happen in this era. It's really interesting. And, you hear things about them, like they talk about the Jedi mind tricks, where they really think about the morals and the aesthetics of that. Is it right of them just because they can to influence someone's thoughts? There's crazy things like lightsabers of all different kind of shapes and sizes. They use lightsabers to fuel their ships. It's so cool and a totally different thing, but very Star Wars. Even though you are introduced to all of these new characters, it still is very rooted. These authors know the universe. They took the time to make sure that they weren't just doing something new and zany. They were really rooting the story in Star Wars, which is super cool. It's really interesting, too, that the main villains are not the Sith. We don't fall back into that same formula of Jedi versus Sith, but we have this whole new collection of villains. We have the Nihil, who are these kind of gangster thieves who are marauding through the universe, led by their eye, whoever they call him. It's actually their leader, Markion Rowe. And he's a really interesting guy because he's got all these crazy routes through hyperspace where he can jump in to places at a very specific time. We learn a lot about the origins of hyperspace too, which is super, super cool. And he also is really interested in exploring the dark side of the Force, and while he's not a Sith by any means, he does explore all these unseen portions of the dark side, which are really interesting and really give the Jedi of that era quite a problem to deal with. So it's really interesting. The other main villain during this time are the Drengir, who are like these kind of plant creatures who like to eat people. It's kind of weird. It works. And they're not as big a part of the story as the Nihil, but they do play a part. And it's nice to get something new, you know? It's nice to see that we can have stories that don't explore the same relationships, but still feel like Star Wars. It's very, very cool. And I like the fact that we haven't seen any of this in animation or in live action yet. That is changing. They are working on a show right now called The Acolyte, which is supposed to take place in the last years of the High Republic, supposedly about 50 years before the Phantom Menace. So that brings out lots of thoughts to me. Since it is so close to the Phantom Menace, are we going to see some characters that we may know of but haven't met yet? Are we going to meet Darth Plagueis training a young Darth Sidious? Wouldn't that be cool? That would be so exciting. Are we going to see some sort of connection with the characters of the Phantom Menace? Is phase 3 of the High Republic going to lead right into this, and then the book's going to intertwine with the show? So exciting, so many possibilities. I really can't wait to see that. You know, it's just another great Star Wars thing to look forward to. Now, you may be wondering, maybe you've read some of the High Republic, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, you might be wondering, well, should I just jump into phase 2, or should I go back and check out phase 1 first? Well, the good news is either way would really work. Phase 2 is actually going to do another time jump back. So supposedly this takes place about 150 years before the events of Light of the Jedi. So this is kind of a prequel era vibe type thing there, where we've told the original trilogy, now we're jumping back in time. It's going to introduce us to all new characters. It's going to introduce us to a new era of the Jedi and the dark side. It should be really cool to see. We might see Yoda. Yoda could still be there. I don't know. That hasn't been announced yet, but for the most part, I think it'll be new characters, new situations. So you could start there and then jump back if you want. Phase 1 was incredible, really well written. So it wouldn't hurt to kind of start there, go through phase 1, and then go back to phase 2 as well. You know, it's kind of like that age-old question right now. We've got 9 stories in the Skywalker saga. What order did you watch them in, right? Do you watch 1 through 9? Do you watch 4 through 6, 1 through 3, 7 through 9, and the way they were released? I don't know. I don't know what the best answer to that question is, but it is, you know, jump on either point. I think you would really like the High Republic, and check out the different formats too. You can definitely just read the novels and get the story, but I think there's so much more to it when you read the comics, you read the novels, even like the YA novels are really important. They have really important story points in them. So I would suggest, if you can, just checking out them all and get the whole experience. So, hey, enjoy the High Republic. I want to know what you think of it. So send me a message. You can check me out at chip@chipboazmusic.com. I would love to hear your thoughts on this and talk a little Star Wars. But speaking of talking Star Wars, it is time to talk about the new episode of Andor. So we got to do that thing. Get ready to cue that spoiler music.
It's a spoiler groove, so you can move, so you don't get no spoilers. It's a spoiler groove, so you can move, so I don't ruin Star Wars. It's a spoiler groove, so you can move, so you don't get no spoilers. It's a spoiler groove, so you can move, so I don't ruin Star Wars.
All right, everyone, you have been warned. From here on out, there are going to be spoilers for Andor Episode 5 and just about everything Star Wars. So hold on as we dig into Andor Season 1, Episode 5, The Axe Forgets. This was, and I've noticed the titles have been very poignant, and there have been some really interesting quotes from the show that we'll get into. And this is one of them that I'll come back to that I thought was really, really powerful. But this episode was a continuation of that slow burn that I was talking about last week. And you can really just feel the tension building, just like you did in the first 3 episodes. It's really interesting because I've been seeing a lot of chatter online about Andor being boring and, people complaining about maybe it being a filler episode. And I have to say, I could not disagree more. We are getting a chance not only to learn more about Andor and who he is as a person, but all of these folks surrounding him right now that were somewhat mysterious. And the more we get connected to their characters, to their stories, to the events around them, the more powerful it's going to be when everything just explodes, which it seems like it's going to happen big time next episode. But we'll wait and see what happens there in episode number 6. But it does seem like we are building towards the top of this arc. And if everything was just all, battle after battle, ships flying around, I like that as much as the next person, but if that was all there was, it wouldn't really be interesting. And I have this sneaking suspicion if that's all it was, there'd be someone out there on the internet complaining that all it is just battles, right? So let's appreciate it for what it is. I love it. This slow burn is really pulling me into the show in a big, big way. So let's decode what happened a little bit there. Most of the episode centers on Andor, Vel, and Vel's crew here on Aldhani as they prepare to infiltrate this Imperial garrison to steal their payroll, which I assume would be to fund the rebellion. So most of the action happens there. Now, we do get these little sneak peeks into the lives of Mon Mothma and Cyril Karn and Dedra Meero, which I'll get into, but they're just little peeks, which builds the tension even more. You know, I get the feeling like, yes, this central event is happening there on Aldhani with Andor, Vel, and her crew, but all these things that are happening in different places on the galaxy are going to intertwine with what's happening there in Aldhani, and are all going to come together in a really powerful way. Boy, Tony Gilroy, who wrote this show, really doing a great job. I'm very impressed with the writing. But let's get back to it. Aldhani. So Andor is there, and this episode gives us a chance to get to know the members of Vel's crew a little bit better as they all prepare to attack this Imperial garrison. You can imagine the tensions rising because they've been working for months to do this. They're putting their lives on the line. They're fighting against crazy odds, and Andor is in the mix at the last minute. And let's not forget my favorite part, right? Andor is not Andor. His name is Clem. It just trips me up every time they call him, hey, Clem. It's so funny. Why did he pick that name? Whatever. Clem, we'll go with it. So Clem wakes up there on Aldhani and is startled because everyone's out of the bunks, but all his stuff is gone. And right away, the first conflict with Avril Skeen, who's one of the guys in Vel's crew and is obviously a little hung up and does not trust Andor one bit. So Andor rushes out and he sees all his stuff laid out. He does check to make sure that crystal is safe. The crystal plays a part all through this. What is up with this Kyber crystal? I hope we find out. And I hope we find out how that ties back into Luthien. But so Andor still has a crystal. He goes out and Skeen has all his stuff laid out. And Skeen's like, oh, Vel wanted me to look through it. It's all junk. What's your story? What are you even doing here? And they kind of talk. There's a little bit of understanding between the two of them, but a lot of distrust. And Skeen's very upfront. I don't trust you. I don't like that you're here. And Andor's kind of like, well, too bad, basically. Right? But you start to see that tension boiling up. Things heat up even more when Andor gets called in by Tarman and Vel to talk about the plan. Another planning session here. And Andor realizes that they haven't really thought the plan through. They don't know how to get this ship they're stealing out of the planet. They have no idea. And so there's some conflict, and that concerns Andor. They're already putting themselves in a horrible position. This just makes it worse. Fortunately, Andor knows how to do it. He insists he's going to be flying. And you see, one of the things I think about this. Now, again, last week I said I don't want a prequel to the prequel to Andor, or to Rogue One, which is a prequel to A New Hope. We don't need to layer things like that, but I'm starting to wonder. I'm really starting to wonder and hope we see some flashbacks because Andor seems very experienced at this point and really seems to have some knowledge about how things work in the Empire and how he can kind of work the system a little bit. And that's not just street smarts. I mean, yes, he's street smart, but there's more to it than that. So I hope we get some flashbacks that explain where he's coming from, because all these other people, Vel and her crew, who have been working for months to figure this out, don't know what's going on, and he does. So tell me, what is going on with that? So with that bit of tension resolved, we get into a training sequence, and Tarman, oh wait, I gotta back up because my favorite thing happened before that, where we meet Karis Namek, who's probably the youngest person in this little group of rebels. And he is so funny because he has it all figured out, right? He has a notebook full of theories and conspiracy theories and ways that the Empire has manipulated the galaxy. And he's really sat and thought this through. And it's funny because, we watched the whole prequel trilogy where all this was happening and no one thought about it. The Jedi thought they were above that, so they just let it go and no one tried to figure it out. And here's this kid who's taking the time to figure it out. He's being all like intellectual about it too. And everyone's like, yeah, you're stupid. They just blow him off. Well, I'm like, come on, everyone. He's got it all figured out. So funny, so interesting. Now we know as we move into this next episode and the infiltration happens, we're probably going to lose some of the crew. Don't lose Karis Namek. I want to see him through the whole show. I want to see him reflect on this. I want to read his notebook. Disney, publish the notebook. I want to see it. I'll read it. Give it to me. And my favorite part of the show, Karis Namek gives Andor Dre milk. Now, milk's a thing in Star Wars, right? We see Luke drink blue milk. We see old Luke drink green milk. Dre milk is pretty much, they all say it's pretty disgusting, but it's what they're all drinking there. And they have these Dre that they're raising there to make sure they get this milk so they can live. And they're goats. They're goats with like 4 or 5 horns coming out. They're so funny looking, and they're there on Aldhani with them. They've got goats. I know we're all wondering, the question everyone's asking, are Dre screaming goats? I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. We do know that Dre milk is disgusting, but it can sustain rebels. So there you go. Dre, official canon in Star Wars. Nothing better. All right. I'll get back to the story. So we've got a training session where Taramyn's training himself, Skeen, Namek, and Andor, or Clem, to act like Imperial soldiers, and they're doing this marching thing. And there's this really interesting sequence where Andor points out that Skeen should be switched up on the other side while they're marching because he's noticed that Skeen is left-handed and the gun should be pointing out right there. Now this makes Tarman's mad right away because new guy here is trying to run the show, right? And he's been in charge. He doesn't want new guy ruining the line of command. But Vel speaks up and she goes through and asks Andor all about everyone who's right-handed, who's left-handed, and he points out what they all are. He's noticed at this point. He also has noticed that Namek is right-handed, but he favors his left while he's shooting. He's made these observations. Now, so right away, Vel overrides Tarman and says, new guy has something to say. You should do that. Okay, but also, again, Andor is experienced. Where does this come from? Okay, we need some flashbacks. We need to know what is going on with him or what happened before this. We've seen young Casa, right? We've seen young Andor when he was a child. We saw him get taken away from his life, kidnapped, whatever, however you interpret that, right? But we've seen that little bit. But there's like at least like 15 years in there where he was in stuff. Now, there's that line in Rogue One where he, gets really intense with Jyn Erso, and it's like, I've been in this rebellion since I was 6 years old. So what was he doing? Where does this happen? What was he involved in? I want to know, because it's starting to appear to me more and more in the show that this is happening, okay, that he has that experience. Now, as they're training, TIE fighters fly by, freak everyone out, tension is rising, but, of course, the TIE fighters don't do anything, but they do fly pretty close to the ground. Everyone gets freaked out, and they say, okay, we're going to leave tomorrow. So they start hiking on their way to the Imperial garrison, and they've got a plan right there. On the way there, while Andor is pausing, getting a drink of water, Skeen comes up behind him with a knife. He's got his arm around his neck. He's holding the knife to his neck, and he cuts off the crystal. And right away, we got this scene. Now, Andor is obviously upset because, Luthien said that crystal was worth a lot of money. There's some weird emotional attachment thing that we don't quite understand yet, but it's worth a lot of money. And that's what Andor is caring about right here. And Skeen just flips out. He says, this is a Sky Kyber crystal. This is worth so much money. What's he doing? Taking that into an attack? Why would anyone do this? And Andor said, look, we all have to trust each other. We're going in. We're going to die if we don't all trust each other. Skeen's flipping out. Vel's yelling at Skeen. And then Andor throws it all out there. And I thought this was really interesting. He says, look, I'm only here because I'm being paid to be here. All right? I am getting paid well to help you. So I'm going to see this through because I need the money. The rest of you need to decide if you're going to see this through, because it's only going to get more intense, and we need to make sure that we know we've got everyone's back. And everyone is visibly upset by this because Vel knew this. Remember, Luthien made Vel take Andor, but obviously no one else in her crew knew this, and they're all very upset by the whole thing. My favorite part of this is we do see Namek's face just like drop when Andor tells him this, because he's got all the conspiracy theories figured out, and he's a full believer in the rebellion and can't believe that anyone else would not be a believer and would just do this for money. Again, my favorite character. He's got to live through this. But we see all of that happening, and we see some of the tension deflate and some of it rise. Vel gets pretty intense, makes Skeen give the crystal back to Andor, and they all move on. Next scene, next day, and Skeen tells Andor a little bit about his background, about how his brother was a farmer and got attacked by the rebellion, lost the farm, or not by the rebellion, by the Empire, lost the farm. All this stuff happened, and after he kind of bears his soul, he kind of says to Andor, all right, well, that's about the best apology you're going to get from me. And you see them start to bond, which is really, really cool because, again, the writing on this show is so smart. It's not like, you just like, oh, I'm sorry, man. Oh, that's cool, bro. We'll just go attack. It's not that stupid stuff. No, it's like character development. We start to understand who Skeen is. We start to care, and we start to care about this relationship that is building there. So they get in position, they give the signal, they're ready for the attack. While all of this is happening, Lieutenant Gorn, who remember is their contact in the Empire, is setting things up at the garrison to make sure that this attack goes through. Now, he is playing it really smart because we've all learned, Imperial troopers are not the smartest folk in the world, but he plays them pretty darn good. he, is just yelling at everyone about all this work that's not done and how inefficient and horrible the troops are. And they're, really frustrated. And one of them comes up and says something like, well, this is not the ideal post. No one likes being on Aldhani. The one reason we might be here is this thing that's happening tomorrow night. So it would be really great if you could let us go. And so Gorn plays it, right? And he's kind of like, well, you're all totally inefficient and awful, but because I'm such a nice guy, I'm going to do this, and we're just going to have a skeleton crew, have almost no one on the base, but if you don't have your job done the next morning, you are going to be reprimanded, blah, 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 blah. But notice he's set it up so that no one's going to be on the base, so that Andor and crew can get in there and get the job done. Pretty sneaky. We learn a little bit about his background too. Andor kind of interviews Vel on him because, he obviously doesn't trust an Imperial officer trying to help them. And I guess Gorn, was kind of disgraced by the Empire. He was rising through the ranks, and then he wasn't. He fell in love with someone on Aldhani, and then they weren't together for some reason. We didn't get quite details. But the biggest thing is, she says, well, he's lost his love for the Empire. And what was really one of my favorite quotes from Vel through the whole show, she kind of ends that conversation with Andor by saying, well, we all have our own rebellion. Which is interesting because, as we watch the original trilogy, it was all about Luke, Leia, and Han, and it was all this noble reason. But, as you get down into the ranks of the rebellion, you start to see everyone does have their reasons, and some of them are noble and some of them aren't, but they have their reasons. So I thought that was really cool to see Vel put that out there. Interesting stuff. So we leave them. They're on Aldhani. They're ready to go. Now, throughout the episode, we get these little flashes to other parts of the galaxy. Like I was mentioning, the first, and maybe one of my favorite, is we go to Cyril Karn, who we remember, really got slapped down for messing up on Ferrix, letting Luthien and Andor get away, really just kind of ruining the whole show. So he's been demoted, he's been kicked out, and he goes back to his mom on whatever planet they're on. I don't know where they are, but it's really funny because she's really awful and really just does a great job of making him feel like the biggest loser around. I mean, let's be honest, he kind of is, but she makes it worse, and he obviously has no love for her. But he's stuck and he's there, and she keeps giving him this food, and she gives him cereal. It's like Captain Crunch, but it's like green and brown, and it's so funny. And he's eating it in milk, and she's sitting there yapping at him, telling him how inadequate it is, and he's sitting there eating this Star Wars Captain Crunch. It's so good. So good. And he is obviously about to snap. And it'll be really interesting to see him come back into the show. I mean, we got maybe 4 or 5 minutes with him, but the last sequence we have of him, he flips open his little holo device, and it still shows the picture of Andor that he was looking at when he was trying to, fix the problem on Ferrix right there. So we know that he is still holding a grudge against Andor. We also go and we get a couple of minutes with Deidre Merrow, who is still frustrated over the fact that she's being treated like a nobody in the line of power in the Empire. She wants to make a difference, and she's trying to figure it out. So she's going through all these files, and she's got an assistant, and she's starting to doubt herself, but her assistant's like, no, you're right. And the point she's getting at, which is really interesting, is that there are all these pockets of events happening, and maybe it's a more organized rebellion than they know about. So you get the sense that the Empire doesn't realize that there's a rebellion happening yet. And the bigger Empire is overlooking the fact that there's a network of rebels working together across the galaxy to make this happen. But she's starting to figure it out. And you wonder where that's going to lead her. Is that going to lead her back to Luthien? Is that going to lead her to Andor? Or is something else going to happen? But you can see that this is the place where the Empire starts to realize there's an issue. We need to crack down. We need to get these rebels. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that evolves. Then, of course, we're back with Mon Mothma. And these scenes with Mon Mothma, I thought, were some of the most interesting parts of the show. We know Mon Mothma as the leader of the rebellion, right? From the original trilogy, from Rogue One. That's where we saw her. We saw in the last episode her kind of play into that role as she met with Luthien and they were trying to figure out this funding issue for the rebellion. So right away, we envision her as this noble soul who is really going after this because she believes that's what's right. Right? That's how we know her, and that's what we think. These scenes were very interesting because they focused more on Mon Mothma's personal life. We met her husband last week. Her husband's a jerk. He's an awful human being. He's one of these wealthy kind of aristocrats that doesn't care about anything except for himself and his money, right? And having fun and living the luxury life. And he continues that here, but we see some scenes where, Mon Mothma's life against the Empire is not the only thing that's falling apart, but her personal life is falling apart. It starts out where she's getting ready to go for work, and she is set up to take her daughter somewhere. They don't really say, but her daughter gives her a lot of attitude and says, I'm not going with you, and you just care about the way people look at you, and I don't want to be a part of that. And she's visibly hurt by this, and she really wants to have this time with her daughter, but her daughter is really getting in her face, and her husband's just sitting there smirking and really kind of laughing at the fact that Mon Mothma's in this position. And eventually Mon Mothma has enough. She leaves, and you can see it looks like her family dynamic is starting to fall apart. The other scene we get with her and her husband, who's such a jerk. I hate this guy. They're riding in this fancy car in the sky through Coruscant. They've just come back from some event, and her husband is like super critical of her about, you were talking to this person and this person, and why didn't you tell me about this foundation you're creating? And Mon Mothma herself gets this dig in at her husband, which is mean. It's like straight up mean. She's like, well, I didn't think you'd be interested because it's charitable. That's not the kind of thing you do. So you can see their friction, their marriage. And you have to wonder how much of this feeds into Mon Mothma's dedication to the rebellion. Her family life is falling apart. Her life as a senator is falling apart because of the Empire. Where does this leave her? I am really interested to see where her story goes and see how that connects into what's happening with Andor, Vel, and these rebels kind of more on the ground. Boy, such intense stuff. And of course, it ends as we get back to Luthien, and he is visibly worried. He's still at the store. He's still got his outfit on, and his assistant is saying, just calm down, it's not a big deal. And he's like, no, it leads back to me. It all leads back to me. And Vel could lead back to me. And his assistant's like, don't worry about it. Vel's fine. But the big thing that Luthien is just stressing over, he's like, no, the thief, Andor, he can lead back to me. And I'm assuming lead back to Luthien means leads back to the rebellion could be big trouble. So whatever's happening on Aldhani is super important. Wow, it was such an intense episode. Again, I have to say, I love the slow burn. All you haters out there who are just talking about being boring, grow up. This is amazing television. It's only going to get better next week in episode 6 when everything explodes. I can't wait to talk about it with y'all next week. All right, everyone, it is time for the question of the week. Last week, we were talking about how there was a lack of music inside the Star Wars universe, and we never really heard the main characters listening to music outside of things like cantinas and parties and whatnot. So I asked you, what sort of music do you think Han Solo listens to? We didn't get a whole lot of responses, so I don't have a whole lot to share here. So I will encourage, hey, let me know what you think for the question of the week, because I want to talk about it. I want to talk with you about Star Wars, and I want to share it here on the show. But I'm going to share my thoughts. Now, to me, Han is a classic rock guy. I can picture it. I can picture Han and Chewie in the Millennium Falcon, jamming out on some Bon Jovi, really enjoying the Led Zeppelin, get some headbanging going right there, and really making the time pass with a little bit of hard rock energy. I could see it. I don't know. If you still have thoughts on that, let me know and let's share them, because I think it's kind of a fun thing to imagine and explore. This week, I wanted to ask you another question that relates a little bit to what I was talking about at the beginning of the show. At the beginning of the show, I was talking about the High Republic and all the cool things that they're doing in there with the comic books and novels and audio novels and all that sort of thing. And to me, I'm a big reader. I'm actually a big audiobook guy. On my way to work, I have a commute both there and back, and I pass a lot of that time by listening to audiobooks. And as you can imagine, a lot of that is Star Wars audiobooks. And so I just love that side of Star Wars outside of the movies and TV shows. So my question for you, what is your favorite bit of Star Wars that's not a movie or is not animation? What is your favorite bit of Star Wars that's not a movie and is not animation? Could be an audiobook, could be a comic book, could be a piece of art, could be a bit of cosplay, who knows? But you tell me, what is your favorite bit of Star Wars that is not a movie and is not animation? You can let me know in lots of ways. Leave a comment down below so we could discuss it right here on YouTube. You could get a hold of me on any of the socials. You can find me facebook.com/ChipBoazMusic. You could find me at Instagram.com/ChipBoaz. You could find me at Twitter.com/ChipBoaz, or you could find me at TikTok.com/ChipBoaz. And of course, if you'd like to email me, just send me a message to chip@chipboazmusic.com. Let's talk about it. I cannot wait to hear your responses. Well, thank you everyone for hanging out this week and talking Star Wars. It is always a high point of my week, and I love connecting with you like this. we will be back next week with a little bit of talk about Andor Episode 6, as well as other things in there. In the meantime, please, if you can, subscribe to the channel. You'll be able to catch up with all of the episodes of Galactic Grooves that are coming. There will be more Star Wars songwriter songs coming your way, as well as all the original music that I put out there. I would really love your support if you could subscribe to the channel. If you want to go one step further, look down further, and you can join the Boaz Brigade and get regular messages and extras from me about music, Star Wars, and more. It's a super fun group of people to be a part of, so I hope that you can join me there. And tell me what you think of the show. If you've got ideas, if you've got thoughts, if you want to talk Star Wars, send me a message. You can send it to chip@chipboazmusic.com. I would love to hear from you. I hope you have a great week, everyone. We'll be back next week talking Star Wars. Until then, may the Force be with you. Keep the groove going.